Well, good morning. Welcome. This is, we're kicking off the event, first presentation this morning. So I'm going to be talking about AI and collaboration systems. Certainly, if you have questions, just you can interrupt me, put up your hand, but there'll be time for questions at the end. My name's Kevin Keeler. I'm half analyst and half consultant, which means I work with large organizations, oftentimes helping them define their strategy around collaboration systems. And then on the analyst side, I work with vendors, helping them build their strategy or get out, some of the go-to-market messaging as well. And I've been doing this for a while. I started way back in time writing video games for the Commodore 64 and VIC-20, and that's kind of how I fell in love with technology. And my real focus and what I'm going to try to talk through is, how do you effectively apply this technology to organizations to make a measurable business impact in a positive way. This is part of the IMCCA technology track here at the Commercial Integrator Expo. If you're not familiar with the Interactive Multimedia and Collaborative Communications Alliance, this is a nonprofit group that's been in existence for 20 plus years. The IMCCA has a booth on the show floor, and if you're not a member, it's free to join, so you should certainly drop by the booth and learn more about that. But thanks to the IMCCA for sponsoring a bunch of these technology talks. There's lots of press recently, and it seems like in the last month, it's been, a key focus to talk about artificial intelligence being overhyped. This is kind of a representative of the Gartner hype curve. And so there's lots of articles that come out and say, okay, well, now we're in the trough of disillusionment. I don't believe that's the case, and I'm going to talk why that is. I would say really where we are with AI is there's been huge advancements in capabilities. So this graph has capabilities on the vertical axes and business value on the horizontal axes. So you want to kind of get over to the right. But where I think we are is, the capabilities have grown, but really we're in this canyon of confusion. So unlike other technologies that perhaps are overhyped in terms of capabilities, with AI, it's more that organizations are struggling to figure out how to make use of the different capabilities, whether it's building your own model or the generative AI. So what's happening is there are a lot of kind of deaths on AI. People are falling into the canyon of confusion. They're all excited about using it, but then their users may be misapplying it. And so we'll talk a little bit about what has to happen there. There's two parts, and I'm going to fill this in, but organizations need to do things, and then there's some specific things that vendors need to do. So both parties have to work at different things in order to allow the organizations to get where we want to, leverage the AI capabilities and be able to really increase the business value that AI is bringing. So we'll that's where you get the gold star, and we'll talk through some of the barriers that we see with organizations for achieving that. One of the biggest problems is there's multiple flavors of AI, and even a lot of technology writers or journalists, they confuse these, and then they're raising some challenges that apply to some of the flavors of AI but don't apply to others. So what I want to talk about is there's AI where you can build your own AI models. I'll talk a little bit about what some of the challenges there are. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes AI, and especially in the AV space, this has been there for years, and I'll talk about some of the kind of advantages and challenges there. And then there's this new, generative AI. This is the ChatGPT, the Microsoft Copilot, the Google Gemini, and others. And each of the different flavors of AI have different challenges, and and I think it's important to understand that, because AI is this broad term that encompasses various technologies, all of which are trying to mimic human understanding, human comprehension. So if we take a look at building your own AI model, this is challenging. It's not really for the faint of heart. Most organizations are not going to do this. This is where you might hear things like data is the fuel that drives AI, which is absolutely true. But you need a lot of good data, but it's not just okay to have data. Sometimes people say, well, I've recorded all these contact center calls. But the problem is you need to have both data, and it has to be annotated. You need to know if that was a good call that led to a good outcome or a bad call. So the challenge here is you have to have good, unbiased data, and then you have to be able to score the data, and you need lots of expertise. You need data scientists here, and you need to then do a lot of testing so that you don't get one of those horror stories that then makes the news where the AI chatbot says something inappropriate, or there was a case of an airline that said there's a fare that didn't exist, and then the person sued the company because the AI chatbot, they said, the courts ruled that the AI chatbot was acting as an agent for the company, and if it said that this existed, the company had to honor it. So most of us are not going to be in this building your own AI model. But a lot of the stories that talk about the downfall of AI are focusing on this. One of the real, success stories on AI is all of this behind the scenes AI. The great thing about this is, and especially in the audio and visual space, this is AI that just has been working. The users don't really need to do anything. So it's things like the ever-improving background noise removal. It's removing lawnmowers and dogs barking when everybody was working from home. And now it's improving to do things like voice isolation. So you can train it on your voice. And so even if there's other people talking more in open concept offices, it's going to filter out everybody's voice except for your own. That takes a little bit of user involvement, and that they need to record and say it's their voice and kind of sign up for it. But the noise removal, the great thing about that AI operating behind the scenes is it just was making all of our meetings, all of our calls sound better. The same thing on background blurring, to be able to identify people versus what's in the background. That was just AI that you pretty much clicked and it worked. Background replacement or cleaning up the background now. People let you add things in, to the background to make your space look a little more interesting. Like all the auto framing, auto captioning, where the speech to text is now shown. Great for both accessibility and also if you're wanting to watch a meeting playback without, for instance, having audio. The real-time translation, participant identification, where it can recognize your face if you enroll, and then automatically, especially in a meeting room shot, identify the participants for the people remote who may not know who's in the room. And then, of course, that also helps with speaker attribution when you have a transcript. And then you've got the AI-directed multi-camera setup. I'm sure there's a bunch that will be shown on kind of the exhibit floor. That's the new thing where, I think from the vendor's perspective, they like it because you put more cameras in the spaces. And now, as opposed to having somebody operate the cameras, AI acts as the director and chooses the most appropriate camera. Once again, the great thing about this behind-the-scenes AI is in the devices or in the collaboration platforms, it, for the most part, just works. Now, generative AI, or these large language models, this is really where the excitement is ever since, kind of the fall of 2023. ChatGPT took off, and it turns out that large language models are good at doing a whole bunch of things. If you give them a short prompt, they can write text for you. They're also good at doing summarization, as well as just answering some general questions and having a dialogue in more of a human type way. But here's some important things to know about these large language models. You don't have to have any data, because these are pre-trained models. So for example, OpenAI, and there's some lawsuits around what data they use, but effectively, they've gone out to the internet and they've used, whether it's Wikipedia or Reddit or other sources. Supposedly they use the New York Times, because now the New York Times is suing them. They said you don't have the right to use the data. But these, if someone says, well, one of the challenges with AI is you need to have good data, well, yes, the companies that built these large language models, they had to have the data sources, but in terms of your use of it, it's already been pre-trained. And it's not trained on your data. Pretty much all the vendors have come out now and said, hey, if you use Copilot or Zoom AI Companion or Google Gemini or WebEx AI Assistant in your organization, we're not using your data behind the scenes to improve the model, right? So, because there were privacy and security concerns initially. And these large language models, these generative models, and when you hear ChatGPT, that the GPT is generative pre-trained transformer, which is the type of model. But as I said, it turns out that these large language models, when they're trained on millions and billions of different forms of text, they're really good at a whole bunch of things. Writing text given a short prompt. So if you say, write me a story, or hey, I need a paragraph about this, they're really good at that. They're also good at rewriting or rewording. So they, if you say, here's an email, can you make it shorter? Can you make it more persuasive? And you could see if you're a salesperson or if you're a verbose person, this may be very, very helpful. They're also good at summarizing longer documents or meeting transcripts. So they can take a long document and you can say, hey, give me a one-page summary of this 30-page document. Great for example, summarizing perhaps installation guides or key support documents. And they can answer questions about a document. So if you've got a 50-page HR manual and you're interested in what the vacation policy is for some, if you've been at the company for 3 years, you can just say, hey, using this document, answer this particular question. And they do a good job doing that. And they're, even though the creators don't even understand why this is, it turns out that when you build these large language models, there's these, what they call emergent properties. And so these models, even though they're not technically trained on determining sentiment or emotion, it turns out that they do a good job at this. So you can, for example, some executives have multiple back-to-back or overlapping meetings, and they'll take the transcript and say, was there any conflict in this meeting? And if there was, then they delve into it more, perhaps, to see. But you can also use it in the contact center space, saying, hey, was this a positive call, or was there a negative sentiment? And it turns out that these large language models are very good at determining and they're doing it not from the audio, they're just doing it from the speech to text. They're just working with the text. And the other thing that they're also very good at as well is acting as a coach. So you can, for example, if you present at a meeting, you can record the transcript, and then you can say, hey, how could I have done a better job? What did I say that was unclear? Same thing in a sales call or in a contact center scenario. But one of the things, and this is really the problem with the canyon of confusion, if you don't at least have a basic understanding of how these models are working, how this generative AI is answering, what context the particular solution that you're using is leveraging to answer your questions, they can make mistakes. And I love this, that in the artificial intelligence community, they call these hallucinations, which I think is a fascinating, really it's just a mistake. It gives you the wrong answer, but I guess it sounds better when we call it a hallucination. So the key thing here, to not be that hiker falling into the canyon of confusion, is you always have to review the results from the generative AI, because they're incented. The whole point of the model, it's a big prediction, and it will come up with an answer even if there is no answer. So for instance, there's been cases where a lawyer used it and it submitted a brief to the judge and it made up cases, it referred to cases that didn't exist, because the model, in some ways the model wants to make you happy. You say, give me 10 of this, and even if only 8 exists, it will fill in the blank with made up things. And the vendors are doing a better job of often labeling and reminding you that the results are made up. Recently I asked Google Gemini for a list of articles that were negative in terms of AI, and it gave me a list. But some of them were quite old. And I said, hey, could you just show me ones that were written in 2024? Because, as I said, I was trying to explore, okay, are articles really, kind of more of a negative sentiment? And it gave me a whole bunch. That said, sure, I can give you the list of, negative articles that were written in 2024 around AI and generative AI. So I read it, and I said, oh, this is perfect. But right at the bottom, it says, by the way, I don't have access to the internet. I've just made up these titles, and I only know ones, I've only been trained on data up to 2022. So you could very easily, if you didn't understand that it sometimes hallucinates, you could very easily cut and paste that. They all sounded good. It said, it had sources. It said, oh, this one came from Forbes in July of 2024. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. But in that case, it did indicate that, it kind of had taken creative liberties just to make that up. So these generative large language models, do a lot of good things, and they do, as I said, they do great with summarizing, they do great writing, helping you do things, like brainstorming, but you do always have to double check the work. There's a project manager at one company, won't name the company. He's busy, so he doesn't attend some of the project meetings, and they happen to use Microsoft Copilot, which does meeting summaries. But to save time, he sends that out as the minutes for the meeting. That's a hugely dangerous process, because he hasn't attended the meeting, so he doesn't know, maybe it missed something in the meeting summary that was critically important. Maybe it got something wrong. I mean, if you're not in the meeting and then you're sending out these minutes as if you attended, you would never do that as a human. You would never say, okay, I didn't attend the meeting, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down and write the minutes of a meeting and send it out as if I was there. But people run themselves, get themselves into trouble and fall into the canyon of confusion when they do things like not review the minutes or not attend a meeting and then send out the minutes as if they could review that. The other thing is, and I'm going to drill down on this because I think it's of a special interest to kind of the AV community, is audio quality is critically important. And why that is because meeting summaries or call summaries or contact center summaries, post-call summaries that could be automatically generated for the agents by AI, they're all based on speech to text. So if the speech to text, if it's unclear, and sometimes it can be, obviously it depends on the microphones, especially in a room. This becomes, problematic if, some of the people are farther away from the mic, because what can happen is, if the transcription is wrong, the summary is going to be wrong. And occasionally it can be 180-degree wrong, where something like a not isn't picked up. So somebody's saying, do not do this, and if that's not picked up or there was noise in the room, this becomes a problem. Now, some of the state of the art Also, and I think this is important, there's real-time captioning, which, that model is designed to be quick because it's trying to, put that on, whether it's doing real-time translation or real-time captioning. It's trying to do it right away. And then there's models that are tuned to say, okay, if there's a meeting recording, you can spend a little bit more time processing that and trying to, figure out what words make sense there. So you can get different kind of summaries or a transcript depending on the tool that's used, whether it's, post-event transcription or real-time transcription. But once again, all of it is based on, first step, which is the speech to text. And if the audio is bad going in, you can be assured that the text that, is then being summarized is going to have some problems with it. And the thing that is increasingly important is context. And so we think of these large language models. They're trained on a huge amount of data. They know a lot of things about the training data set when they were trained. And it takes huge horsepower. This is what's driving the NVIDIA stock so high, is that, OpenAI and other companies building models, they're buying thousands and thousands of processors and spending millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars to train these models. But they're trained at a point in time. And so now, if you ask, like I did, Google Gemini model for 2024 titles, it doesn't have access to that by itself in the model because it was trained in 2022, it said. So, what has to also be taken into consideration is what is the generative AI also looking at? Sometimes that's the internet for up-to-date information. But a lot of times, it may just be, for example, the meeting transcript. So as I said, you can ask questions of the generative AI based on the meeting transcript. But if that's the only source it has, let's say in the meeting we say, I'm from Toronto, let's say we're planning, and in the meeting we talk about the next week we're gonna, be in Toronto. If I ask the generative AI, if I say, well, what's the weather going to be like in Toronto next week, because I'm gonna try to pack and wanna bring appropriate clothes, it has no idea based on the meeting transcript, because if that's its only source of context, it doesn't know. And so what vendors are doing in the collaboration platform is they're starting to say, okay, I'm going to look to the internet for context. Maybe I'm going to look at some internal databases if you connect them in. But context becomes very important. And here's a very simple example. It's like if you have this phrase, Mary had a little lamb, well, this can have multiple meanings, and without additional context, we don't really know what it means. And AI, generative AI, is exactly like this. And so this is why, I'm going to say this multiple times, you need to review the output. So the literal interpretation of this is, okay, she had a pet. The culinary interpretation is she had a small meal that consisted of, I guess, lamb. She had a little lamb. The agricultural interpretation could be, well, she was a farmer who raised lambs. Maybe the metaphorical, she has a lamb. She was followed by, admired by somebody, right? So she has a lamb that follows her around all the time. Informal, had a little lamb, like cheated, and then the crude one is that she had sex with a little lamb. So obviously, context is very important. And all the collaboration vendors are working to say, okay, I've got this large language model, that's the base, but now I want to add more context into the meeting summary. Some are looking at, a lot of times if you're in meetings, sometimes questions get answered in the chat that runs kind of in parallel to the meeting. So some of the vendors are saying, yes, I'll take the meeting transcript, and then I'll take any chat that's going on, and I'll also use that because maybe some questions and some information context was useful there. Some are looking at previous meetings. Some are, I talked in the meeting room context, being able to visually identify or to identify speakers by their voice profiles. That allows you to have a better understanding both of who's in the meeting, which is important when doing the summary, but also who said what. It was very easy kind of during the pandemic, if people were all working remotely because you knew, because one person, Kevin was on Kevin's laptop and Sue was on Sue's laptop, and it was very easy to know who said what because you have all those independent audio streams. Now that there's more meetings happening in person in rooms with multiple people, without either a voice profile or another, facial recognition, it becomes very difficult to attribute who said what, which then, of course, these meeting summaries, one of the great things is the action items, and if I say, yeah, okay, I'll take care of that for next week, if it doesn't know that it's Kevin saying it, it becomes problematic. So from an AV professional perspective, as I said, I'm doing a session at 11, I think it's 11, where I'll talk in more detail about the features that each of the different collaboration platforms have. But AV professionals, beyond the room. Now, certainly all of the behind the scenes AI, whether it's multi-camera or noise canceling or some, auto framing, some video techniques. I mean, all of that is going to be, shown off on the exhibit floor, I'm sure. AI will be a big theme for some of the new hardware that people are showing off. But really, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can use as an AV professional generative AI inside the tools, whatever platform you're using for collaboration. You can use it to help write more persuasive proposals. It's great to just be able to say, you take whatever document you've written and you say, oh, this is great, but run it through AI. It gives you some good ideas. You may not accept all those ideas, but sometimes it really gives you some good thoughts on, oh, okay, this is a better way to, to phrase that. It can also help you really streamline a whole bunch of implementation steps. So, creating project plans. And especially if there's something that's new or for users that, haven't done something before, it does a pretty good job of if you say, hey, I need to install 10 Microsoft Teams rooms in these, what are the various steps that I should be considering? It may not be perfect, but it's a lot better than starting with a blank piece of paper. Same thing when you're writing, a status report. I mean, it can give you either based on the meeting summary, you can use it to say, okay, summarize the key status items over the next period of time. Or, if you're getting a lot of project queries, if someone's asking questions about a status of a particular project, if emails are coming in, it can do a good job helping you respond to a high volume set of emails. So these are things that it can definitely help you with. It can also, help you summarize lengthy installation instructions. So if you wanted to have a quick checklist, you say, okay, I've got a 30-page document that, steps me through the configuration of this room-based system. Okay, what are the key things, extract and build me a checklist, a one-page checklist of the things that I should, check for, as a final step in, testing out the room. So it can definitely extract key points from longer documents, and it does a good job at that. As I said, support questions, if those are coming in, certainly an opportunity to help respond to those, or requests for additional information, a great opportunity to, leverage AI to help with email responses in a, a faster way. I think the challenge that we're all facing, because this is relatively new, is most organizations and most users, they'll try it out, and the adoption curve for, generative AI looks like, okay, real fun at the beginning, maybe the first week, the first month, and then if it doesn't get integrated into your normal workflow, the use falls off because you forget to use it, right? You sit down and somebody asks you to write a proposal, and you start with an existing template or a blank piece of paper, whereas if you get into the habit of saying, I'm going to let generative AI take a first crack at it, help me build an outline, give me some ideas, when you do that, then it's much more likely that you'll continue to use it and to derive value going forward. So, back to this with some more specifics in terms of what to avoid falling into this kind of, you don't want to be this guy again. So, okay, so we got to go across this bridge. Organizations, need to do a number of things. They need to experiment with this, because the truth of the matter is, I said, okay, AV professionals can use generative AI. If your firm doesn't do it, a competitor is probably going to be doing this. And so you need to experiment with it and figure out if and what use cases inside your organization it enhances. Because there are some use cases that it's just going to waste time. People like to say, okay, write a poem about this. And, that's a great example. It's quite entertaining. It's arguably not helping you get work done. In fact, it's distracting you from probably, it's a great procrastination tool. So you do need to experiment, because you're trying to identify what use cases in your organization can be improved by using generative AI. But organizations also, they have to allow both the AV professionals and the IT groups, and these hopefully work together, they have to allow them the time to understand both the risks and the rewards of using this. And the only way, there are some security and privacy. If you're a multinational company, for instance, you're going to be interested, or someone is going to be interested, where is this data stored? If I'm doing a meeting transcript, how long is it kept around for? Do we need to have some policies about not recording certain meetings that are more confidential? How do we deal with if we have clients on the, in the meetings? What's going to be our policy in terms of recording that? So, you need to figure out, facial identification. That's been tried before. And now the vendors are trying to say, okay, well, the end user can enroll and decide, and record a voice sample, or provide, kind of take a picture of your face so that the room system or the audio system can identify them. And they're trying to say, this isn't going to run afoul of some of the EU rules, because the individual user can, basically provides permission to do this, and they can withdraw their permission. But in different organizations, the security and privacy people have different, kind of ideas on that. And so you need time to figure this out inside the organization. And then you do need to provide ongoing training. This is brand new. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that this helps. There's some qualitative. People will, say, oh, I feel it helps. But we're just now starting to get quantitative data. And so, the ongoing training, as the features, each month, almost each week, come out, you need to make sure your end users are aware of the features and are making the most use of it to get the benefits for that. And then you really do, need to monitor the usage, because depending on the tools that you're using, some are available now at no additional cost inside collaboration platforms. And in the next session, I'll kind of give the breakdown on pricing and different platforms. So some effectively come for free, and some it's an additional license. So if you're paying for something, you want to make sure that it wasn't just, a short-term use, that you're actually getting sustained value for that. And then potentially, and I put a question mark here, you'd like to be able to track productivity in terms of, is generative AI helping me get my job done faster? The reason that the question mark here is all the executives, when we talk about, okay, what's the objective, they all say they want to improve productivity. The problem is, for a lot of knowledge workers, productivity isn't currently being tracked. You may not know what the productivity is of a project manager. And so while you would like to say that this is going to improve productivity, if you're really serious about measuring that improvement in productivity, you'd also have to be serious about establishing a baseline of productivity. And while everybody talks a good game, not everybody, and quite frankly, for knowledge workers, few people put in place the systems to be able to track that productivity. So you may have to come up with other KPIs that you're going to measure for the success of the project. So that's what orgs should do to kind of complete their half of the bridge. But as I said, vendors need to do a bunch of things. And they are working on this, but they still need to simplify the user interface and, in some cases, the licensing, because this can be a barrier. It's confusing to figure out what it's going to cost. And then with the user interface, they both need to simplify it and do things like constantly remind people that they need, this was generated by AI, and the results should be double-checked by a human. You always want to have the human in the loop. They need to strive for consistency. One of the challenges of testing AI systems is that it's not like a computer program where, given the same input, it always gives the same output. If you ask a large language model a question, it's going to every time, because it's a probabilistic model, every time it gives you a slightly different answer. And so the consistency piece is, the vendors are working to put guardrails in. So it's fine if it's, different. It's not fine if, for example, 1 time out of 10 or even 1 time out of 100, it's totally wrong. And so, they're working to ensure that there's the consistency, but it is a harder problem in terms of the testing of that. And that's why you'll continue in the news to hear, it'll make a story when a chatbot or something goes awry, because that still happens. As I said, they need to emphasize in both the user interface, and if you cut the text, some of them now are adding this thing saying generated by AI, that they really do need to emphasize that humans need to be in the loop to review this, because AI, large language models, as I said, they make mistakes or hallucinate. And as these things rapidly change, one of the things that we've seen is it's such an agile development process around these AI companions that sometimes the documentation is out of date. And that becomes a problem when you're trying to figure out either how to configure this, or you're an IT pro trying to figure out, okay, should I expect that that I can use it in this particular way? So they definitely, the vendors need to, yes, make the advancements quickly, but at the same time make sure that the documentation is advancing at the same pace that the actual tool is. And create training materials. Some of the vendors are doing a great job here, but in terms of driving usage, but more importantly adoption, and helping users understand how they should use it and give good examples, they need to keep creating end user training materials, as well as IT and AV professional focused training materials that talk about how to use the generative AI. So really that then is the two kind of parts of the bridge, and as I said, it gets us to where we all want to be with the particular gold star. So with that, that is what I wanted to kind of review in terms of how AI, and specifically generative AI, is being incorporated in some of the areas and challenges. But I have some time for questions if there's any questions in the room. Yes?
This might be very elementary and granted AI, but is the large language model gathering all the information from everything that was ever written, including voice and Zoom meetings? I mean, is it all open to the internet? Is a Zoom meeting private, or is that out there in the world?
Yeah. So that's a good question in terms of, okay, yeah, what is the large language model? Where's it gathering the data from? So all of the vendors have said that they are not training the large language model on any of your corporate data. So no, if you use Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams or Cisco WebEx, your meeting transcripts are private to your organization. And so it won't be like all of a sudden your corporate IP is now being used to train another model. The large language models, the vendors they're not, that's a little bit of the secret sauce in terms of what training data did they use. they all contend that they used publicly available training data. And now what you're seeing is different vendors to build future versions of these large language models because they keep improving them. They're doing deals with, so some have deals with, for example, Reddit. And they say, okay, we're going to pay Reddit to have access to that, and Reddit will block other large language model vendors from using that data. But today, they're all, they've all been trained on the publicly available, I would say, internet. So a lot of it is probably Wikipedia, which is probably a pretty good source because it's self-edited. I worry about some of the stuff on Reddit. Like, I don't know if that's a great source. Elon Musk talks about how Grok, one of their models, is trained on Twitter. And if you look at some of the stuff that's posted in tweets, I'm not sure that that's a great source, for having a factual model. So, but your corporate data is safe from that.
What about Amazon and, books?
Well, and I think that, there are some lawsuits going on because authors, for example, have been able to go into some of these large language models and say, hey, write the first chapter, I don't know, of a John Grisham lawyer, model, and they find that it's, reproducing something that is either identical or very, very similar to a book that they had written as an author. And they're saying, well, wait a second, we didn't give you the right to do that. I think right now the defense of the vendors is the vendors saying, hey, we just used publicly available internet data. Someone else did something that they shouldn't have. Someone else posted a PDF copy of a novel, and we just kind of sucked up, what was available on the internet. That's not on us. That's on whoever that other person is. Those lawsuits are still, working their way through the courts. There's some people that believe that that will cause a bunch of these large language models. And there's a big lawsuit against like OpenAI, which created ChatGPT, that will, some people believe that that'll require OpenAI to effectively scrap what they have and then create a new model on training data that they have the rights to. I think that there's so much money at play that they probably will work out some kind of deal. But right now, it's quite litigious as the world sorts out, how this is going to move forward. Yes?
So I've seen people use OpenAI to put information in, like they wrote something and it comes back and they edit it and they work on it that way. I've also seen people say, okay, I need to give a speech on this topic with this information, and it pumps it out. At what point do you have to cite that you used AI or plagiarism, or where does that all fit in? And what's mine and what's its, and
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think once again, that's still being worked out because whether it's in AI, we didn't talk about it, but it can create images as well. So it's like from an art perspective, are you the artist? Who holds the copyright? So copyright law doesn't really address AI, so that's still being kind of worked out. What some organizations, and one in specifically, Microsoft has said, they say, look, we're charging, so their AI assistant is called Copilot, and they charge for it. It's $30 per user per month. And so Brad Smith, who's one of the presidents at Microsoft, he has said Microsoft will indemnify any organization using Copilot if they get sued. So if you use Copilot and you write something and then somebody comes back and says, you plagiarized me, Microsoft said that they will defend you and they'll pick up all the legal costs. So effectively, they will indemnify you from the use of that tool. Zoom came out with Zoom Docs, and I was talking to their privacy and legal person. They don't yet have that indemnification, but I think that may come as well for because when you ask it and it writes something for you, how do you know that if it, kind of pieced together things from multiple things, so it is a unique piece of work, or if it just like somehow took verbatim something and now you're effectively plagiarizing someone else. I think in the journalistic settings, different publications have different ideas. I write a whole bunch of different articles. Some publications say, we don't want you to use AI at all. Others say they may or may not say anything. Some publications, heck, they're pumping out tons of articles just using AI, right? There's some sports stories in the Olympics and what have you. There was whole recaps that were created just by AI. So I believe, if you're using it, you should probably cite it, but it becomes, confusing where if you say, hey, rewrite this paragraph to make it more persuasive, like I'm not going to put a citation and say I used OpenAI. I'm just going to say, oh, that's a good idea, So I think all of it is a brave new world, and I think, all of it requires, this experimentation, and from a legal perspective, I imagine some of these things get sorted out in the courts, but it'll take years. Any additional questions?
So I just want, so in what situation or scenario does my data becomes an open source?
Well, I think it never does. It never does with the commercial tools, right? So all of the vendors, as I said, have said we don't train our model on your data. That's true for the commercial ones. If you go to a free tool and start conversing with it, and this, they talked about shadow IT, now there's shadow AI. You don't want your users to go and say, remember I said it's good about summarizing. Let's say you take this I'm a consulting firm, an audit firm. I say, oh, this is a really complicated financial document. Could you please summarize it? And I just paste it into some website. I mean, that's a big problem that you don't want your end users to do. But if you, have, Zoom or WebEx or Copilot from Microsoft, even Google Gemini, I think people are a little mistrusting of Google because a lot of times you are the product, right? Gmail's free because they are, kind of serving up ads or what have you. But, even on the commercial side, because they charge for Gemini, Google said they're not going to take your data. But this is where I said, your IT pro, you may have issues with where even your corporate data is stored, even though it's, your corporate data and not training the model. It might be important to you whether it's in the US or not in the US. And so this is where you need to kind of have the people from a security perspective, if you're a larger organization, be comfortable with, how this is being done. Yes?
Regarding large language models, after the large language model is trained, you mentioned that kind of is a evolving process. What's the lift that is entailed in going back and having the large language model retrained?
Yeah, so if you look at, for example, if we look at OpenAI, and so they had like ChatGPT version 3 and then 4 and then 4.5, it's incredibly computationally expensive. To do the training runs, and then there's like weights in the model, and then they run data sets and they, try to make sure it's giving the right answers. And, there's been huge improvements over the course of the year. So they'll say like, oh, it could write the LSATs, and it used to get, it did better than 80% of people. Now it's like doing better than 97% of people. That retraining process could cost $100 million. I mean, it's huge, and this is why the billions of dollars are being invested in companies like OpenAI, because the computations, to train it on these trillions of documents is just massive. And so as I said, you've got a large language model trained in a point in time, but then it can also, it's not part of the model, but it can also access the internet for, points of data, like, as I said, the weather in Toronto, or what's the stock price of Microsoft today. So that, the combination of using the large language model that does a great job with human language and then connecting it to other data sources, it's called RAG, but that's the technical term for it, which is resource augmented generation, which effectively just means it gets more up-to-date information, but that's not retraining the model, that's just providing with a little bit of different context. I think we're at time. Thank you that was good, a good set of questions. And if you're interested in the different collaborative platforms, I'm gonna go down and talk about the features, and that session is at 11 today in the same room. But thank you very much.